Good morning, Toronto, the world. We are here. My name is Eduardo Harari, and welcome to Spanglish Sports World on the BarnBurner TV network on Single TV channel 250. We are going to have an exciting show for you today. We are going to discuss different topics in sport. There is great news out of the MLS, great news out of the MLB, NBA, hockey as a whole. But first of all, let's remind everybody to please download the BarnBurner and Single apps on the respective stores on Android and iOS, as our good friend John Freeman Olson has just showed you. While you download, make sure that you rate us and leave a comment. It's always nice to understand how the application is working and how are you liking our programming. Both apps are totally free, so there is no reason why not to bring them down on all your devices, even your computers. Single TV also available on Google Chromecast and Chromecast sticks, Amazon Fire and Fire TV sticks, Roku and Roku sticks, and an all smart TVs 2016 and forward. As you can tell, here John Freeman Nelson, and he's ready to attack the world of sport. But starting with the interesting MLS, because it was an interesting turn of events uh, over the last couple of days. We'll recap some of the games that already happened and what's happening today as well. So, John, as we were talking last week, and we made commentaries with regards to the game between Sporting KC and the Philadelphia Union, and we said that it's Philadelphia's tournament to lose. We saw that in that quarterfinal match, a 3-1 win for Philadelphia. Interesting. I don't know if you remember, I said it all depends on what Kansas City team shows up to the playing field, the one that actually takes it seriously, or the one that just thinks they are the number one team in MLS. And I guess the one that thinks they are number one in MLS showed up, and they blew it.
Well, I think that what you saw from Philadelphia, Eduardo, was one of the 45s that we saw. Go ahead and answer the phone. Find out who it is. It's the beauty of live TV. Who is it?
Not for me. It's for my wife.
Oh, the boss. So the boss better get that. What we saw in Philadelphia was probably one of the best 45 minutes out of the blocks in this entire tournament. And when you really put your foot down on a team like Sporting Kansas City, and Sporting Kansas City also did not look like they were 100% going in. And I mean that in the sense it took a little while for the engine to turn over, came out cold. You give up 3 goals in 15 minutes, and Philadelphia just clamps it down. You thought that there was a chance when they got it to 3-1 with the goal from Polito right before the half, that if they could do something early in the second half, that it would be a challenging 45 minutes for Philadelphia to hang on. But I think what we saw in Philadelphia, Eduardo, is one of the best teams in Major League Soccer right now, bottom line. And I know that we can get into this discussion as we go, but when you look at LAFC, and they were the shiny object coming into the tournament. Oh, LAFC, the great offense. And we'll get into that story in a second. But I think that on the left-hand side of the bracket, when you look at Philadelphia, I think that in comparison to LAFC, you saw one of the most balanced teams in Major League Soccer, where when we look at teams like LAFC, you're focused on their front seven and all the offense that they can create, all the firepower that they have. You just asked Carmen Asako about guys like Mark-Anthony Kaye. But when you look at Philadelphia, you saw a breakout game from Brendan Aronson, and there were a lot of international scouts there looking at Philadelphia and what that Aronson could bring. You got to see Santos. You get to see him have a stellar effort as well. But when you look at Philadelphia, I think that there's balance there. When you bring in a guy like Martinez, who plays right up against the edge, and he got that yellow in the 25th, and a lot of folks were thinking, okay, when his engine runs a little hot, how is he going to respond? He responded very well, kept within himself, and he was still his very physical self in the midfield, but he didn't get that other yellow. And I think that you look at a keeper like Andre Blake, and you know what he can bring to the table. You look at Ilsinho and how Jim Curtin has worked things when you bring in a guy like Ilsinho and in and around the 60th minute, and you can sit there and you know that your shape is going to change. You know that your approach isn't going to change, but your shape is going to change. I think that what we've seen in Philadelphia is just reinforcing right now that they are the best team in the Eastern Conference, if not one of the best in MLS.
So one of the things that truly surprised me was Sergio Santos. Sergio Santos came out. I don't want to say he came out of his shell, but yes, he in a pressure situation, he had never been this level of performer. It was just incredible to see him dominate, because he truly dominated this match.
Well, I think that to your point, I think that when you put a player like Santos in a situation to succeed, and I think that that's what Jim Curtin has done with his approach and his system, that you can have a guy like Sergio Santos do very, very well. And I think that the Kansas City match was an example of that. And I think a lot of times that we get lost in the name of a player and what we've seen in the past, and if there's a negative that hangs around for whatever reason, and I'm talking just in a broader sense, that we're stuck with that negative in our head, and then when we see them do something very well, I think it gives us pause to sit there and say, okay, what's the difference here? And I think that the difference with a guy like Santos is that Jim Curtin is putting him in a position to succeed. And I think that that's been the difference, at least so far in this tournament.
Well, let's move on to the game that I think shocked everybody in the soccer world, because we knew it was going to be one of the two teams that were going to get to the final was going to be LAFC, and now they are just out walking about LA because they are no longer there.
Get out of the bubble first, but yeah.
I mean, it was they didn't show the counterattack that I would have hoped to see from them in this game. It's like Orlando maintained the tempo of the game most of the evening. They were able to get to penalties, and that was the success.
Okay, all right. So let's break this down here a little bit. I think that a lot of folks, for whatever reason, and it might be just the Orlando City SC aura, that when it comes to the purple team, as they're referred to in the Southeast, there's always that Schleprock negative vibe associated with them. When Oscar Pareja came in to be their coach from Xolos, I think a lot of folks only were looking at his time at Xolos and not what he built at FC Dallas. And I think that recency bias probably hurt a lot of folks in their perception of what Oscar Pareja wants to build in Orlando City. Oscar Pareja is not the coaching equivalent of chopped liver. He is not just something that you're going to sit there and pick up and go, when it comes to legal pads. Oscar Pareja is not just a short piece of paper when it comes to coaching. He's a very talented individual, and came up with a game plan where, for the first time in a long time, LAFC had this number of shots in the first 45 minutes, 0. And I think that speaks a lot to the game plan that Pareja had going into this match. And you and I talked about LAFC before, and I've talked with Joe and other folks, and Giancarlo and Carmen Asako about LAFC on other programming here on the network. For me, LAFC for all of their offensive firepower, all of that stuff we see in the front seven with Vela, Rodriguez, Rossi, Blessing, K, BWP, Atuesta, all that offense that we see going forward, it is fantastic. And when it floats, and it can be beautiful at times. But the one thing that I will always maintain, and I wish I had that piece of paper because we talked about it yesterday on Soccer Down Here, is analyzing the back four for LAFC. And we saw earlier in MLS's back, specifically in the game against Houston, where the back was exposed. Houston got out to a 3-1 lead, but they ran out of gas and couldn't match LAFC down the stretch. It ends up being a 3-3 draw in the group stage. But I think that LAFC, and I think that this was probably a blueprint that could be used going forward, until LAFC improves their backline, specifically having Dejan Jakovic as one of your starters, where you can take advantage of his age and his lack of speed. I think that what you saw was in the 45 minutes that Chris Mueller was healthy, you saw what he did against the speed of that, with his speed against that backline. You saw what Juan could do overlapping and working in crosses from the right. You saw what Nani was able to do working down the left, and that was the troubled side for me for LAFC with Tristan Blackman on the edge, and then Dejan Jakovic as one of your center backs. And Tesho Akindele was a part of this discussion too. But I think that going against that back line, if you skip the first line or you skip a line and can get it to the back and have that speed that your roster has, I think you can attack LAFC. And that's what we saw. In the match itself, Nani misses a PK in the 58th. And everybody's sitting there going, oh, it's going to be the same Orlando. Oh, no, oh, no, oh, no. Then 3 minutes later, BWP scores. Then everybody's saying, oh, same Orlando. And LAFC is going to win. Yeah, 61st minute. Blah. But Oscar Pareja, what he did, and there was a telling moment here. 10 minutes to go in the match. You see a cutaway of Oscar Pareja talking to his team after the last hydration break. And he's telling his guys, calm down, we're okay. And it was a very telling cutaway for me in the match. And as it turns out, they kept going after it and going after it. And Nani on a corner finds Joao Moutinho, who exposes Jordan Harvey. Jordan Harvey was a late sub on the back. And once again, Jordan Harvey, I want to say 36, 37 years of age. He was late in getting to mark Joao Moutinho, goes in the net, 1-1, go to penalties. And then there was one penalty that Orlando had in the bottom of the fourth that Vermeer would like to have back because he got there, but it trickled under him, and Orlando won. But I think the larger picture here is that LAFC can be had. And until Bob Bradley addresses the back line, you will continue to see moments like this. And really, I think the LAFC should continue to be questioned as the shiny object of MLS because you win a supporter shield. Great. You won a home playoff game. Great. You've lost 2 playoff games. What does that mean? That means that you haven't made it to the last game of the year yet. So I think that LAFC has problems that they have to address, and everybody sitting there focused on LAFC should give the rest of the league credit for going after LAFC and exposing them for their problems, and we'll see what Bob Bradley does from here.
I have a question for you, Vito.
Yeah.
I know we've been talking about the back line, and I accept that because the back line of LAFC is not just penetrable, it's deep down ugly.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the absence of Bella kind of could Bella have done something else to unite that team in some way?
I don't necessarily think so because, I mean, think about all the firepower that LAFC has in addition to Vela. Just because you take Carlos Vela out of the discussion, yes, he is an offensive force. But you would think the way that the roster was structured with BWP, with Rossi, with Rodriguez, with Blessing, with K, with all of this other stuff that you have that's a part of your roster, you'd like to think that offensively they could pick up the slack for not having Vela there. And I mean, that's what I think. I think that other folks might be different and sit there and say, well, without Carlos Vela, they're an entirely different team. They had 2 days less rest, all those kinds of things. For me, I would think that you build a roster with the offensive firepower that you have in case you don't have a Vela. And they didn't have Vela at points last season in MLS in their action. And so once again, that was where Diego Rossi stepped up. That was where Adama Diomande, when he was healthy, stepped up. Diomande is injured, and we saw him early in the group stage, but he hasn't been around as with his foot problems with the remainder of the tournament. But I think that honestly, and another point that I forgot to bring up, I think that the key to going up against LAFC, in addition to chasing the back line when you're on offense, is be physical against LAFC when they have the ball. Cut off the supply lines. And we saw a lot of that by Orlando defensively. But I think that if you slow down LAFC's pace, you knock them off their pegs a couple times. You're physical with the big guns up there. You're physical with Vela. You're physical with Rossi. You're physical with Kay and Blessing and Rodriguez. I think that you take them out of their game, and it's like like when we were growing up, the first time that we got to figure out how to drive a car with a clutch, and we try to figure out the gas in the clutch and try to figure out how much gas you needed. Every single time that you would hit the wrong pedal and the car starts to jerk, and you've got to put the clutch back in to make sure that the car doesn't stall. I think that to me is what you see when you knock LAFC off of their game early and you're physical with them. They have to figure out how to put the clutch back in so the car doesn't stall, and that takes time. And so there are a couple of different ways I think that you can get to LAFC. And I think that we saw one of those the other night. Seattle last year in the playoffs at Bank of California was physical with LAFC, knocked them off their game, knocked them out of the playoffs, didn't get a championship. So I think that there are ways to get to LAFC. I think that Carlos Vela, once again, I think that if you're physical with Vela and you're physical with all that offensive firepower, that's another way to frustrate LAFC too.
So we'll move to today's games because it's two interesting games. And I might play devil's advocate here because people are looking at the first game tonight, which is San Jose against Minnesota, and they are saying San Jose all the way. And I don't know if they keep forgetting that the defensive unit of Minnesota is probably one of the best in the game, to me, in MLS. What do you think?
I'm right there with you. I think that, and the funny thing is, you want me to go into my Eric Cohen impression? I can do that.
Well, yeah, that's what I was, because I'm seeing the 150 plus 115 plus 220, and it just doesn't seem normal.
Nope. For me tonight, and we'll take it a game at a time. For me tonight, the early game, I have Minnesota winning outright. I honestly do. I think that Minnesota's defense, and I know that we were all concerned about, if you're a Minnesota fan, you're looking at Ike Opara and not having him as a part of your backline. I know that there were a lot of concerns, but what we've seen from Aja and from the backline in general, I think that we've seen Minnesota's defense be very, very stout. And I think that San Jose, to me, offensively, they can be frustrated themselves or they can frustrate you, especially from the 70th minute on from what we've seen from their late rushes. But I think that Minnesota defensively, for me, is more stout, and I think that they can frustrate San Jose a little more. I was looking something along the lines of a 2-1 win in regulation. I figure that Wando gets a poach goal somewhere in there, somewhere late. So I guess as I'm talking it through with you, I'm guessing Minnesota gets 2 on the board. I know that there's some concern about the health of Metanire after the last match. But I think that as I'm talking it through with you, it looks like it's 2-0 Minnesota. Wando gets a poacher's goal. We have a sprint to the finish. It's 2-1 Minnesota. But yeah, that plus 200, that over 200 number for Minnesota and for the game that we're going to talk about here in just a sec. Yeah, for me, that was like, oh, that's an interesting one. I will take that number and run.
The other game tonight, New York FC and the Portland Timbers. I mean, the bigger match that was wonder was New York FC knocking out Toronto in that quarterfinal. Sorry, in that the quarterfinal in league play. So I don't know. I mean, I vouch for New York FC having a better, not their back end, but I think their front end their front three are very powerful, and if they get together, they'll be there.
Okay, I'll go the flip side with you. I have Portland in this one, and here's why. A couple of different things. We look at teams in tournaments like this, and I look to coaches who have been through group stages and knockouts and these kinds of tournaments before. Ronnie Dyla has not been in this kind of a tournament before. It's also his first time coaching NYCFC. It's his first games. It's his first season. So I think that the guys are still trying to get adjusted to what he wants them to do when it comes to style. We saw NYCFC early on still trying to figure it out on the fly. I don't think they knew on the field what they needed to figure out to try to put the ball in the back of the net to get full point stemming. Because remember, NYCFC had to wait until practically the end of the group stage to figure out if they were going to be one of those third place teams that was going to be getting in to the knockout stage to begin with. So I don't know what NYCFC team we're going to get in this particular match. Are they still trying to figure things out like they were early on, or are they going to be the team that we've seen in the last couple of games? I'm leaning more toward the former, because when you have a coach like Giovanni Savarese, who has been through all of this stuff before and has been through knockouts and stuff with Portland and getting Portland to MLS Cup and things like that, he knows how to handle these situations. And I think that we saw Portland in the group of death work their way through it and get into the knockout stage. And we have them where they are. Portland had to put up with an FC Cincinnati team that didn't just park a bus. They found the entire garage for the TTC and they put it in front of the net, tipped them sideways, set it all on fire. And that's what Jaap Stam had to do, because he knew that that's the only way that he could compete against Portland. Portland ground their way through. They got the result in the round of 16 to get to where we are now. I just think that Portland is more sound in these tournament situations because of the experience that they have on the field and on the touchline with Savarese. And I just think that NYCFC is still trying to find themselves. So when we looked at that juice box number once again with Portland, that was north of plus 200 again. I just think that you're not giving the proper respect to Portland, and I don't think you're giving the proper respect to Minnesota in these games. So I was thinking that NYCFC, this could be another 2-1, another tight 2-1, but I think that Portland comes through, and I looked at both underdogs coming into the matches tonight as who I was thinking that we're going to make it through, both in regulation. I don't think either's going to go to penalty.
Okay, so let's I'm going to move on to now across the pond.
Okay.
Because we have the Europa Cup that just started this week. We looked at the matches in the last show and looked at what might have happened. To me, the one game that gave me a shock in this one was the Olympiacos Arsenal game. I thought Arsenal was the better team in that match, and Olympiacos just came back from counteracted to everything Arsenal threw at them.
Well, I think that, frankly, I think Arsenal has more issues right now defensively. So when you're looking at anything that's going to be happening with Arsenal, I mean, when you're having to rely on David Luiz, still, that to me is a big problem. And we all know that Matthias Guendouzi was supposed to be the second coming of David Luiz, but his outburst that he had in a match late in the Premier League season has put him on the outs, and so that creates an issue at the back. And I think that when you look at Arsenal, when you're paired up against the Olympiacos and you can't work your way through there, I just you're going. I don't have the most confidence in an Arsenal where Olympiacos won on away goals after knocking them out 2-1. Remember, this was 4 months ago, but I think that what we saw with Arsenal against Olympiacos in Europa League is probably a microcosm of what we're going to see in the FA Cup final with Arsenal going up against Chelsea, when you have the firepower of Chelsea going at it against a questionable backline. I know that there's probably going to be, you want to keep Aubameyang for the future of the club, but I just think that Chelsea in the FA Cup will expose what we saw in Europa League with Arsenal, just in a different situation.
The other thing that I'm looking at is Man United seems to play very efficiently in the Europa Cup always. But where do you see them this time around? Because
I think that they're going to make a deep run. I mean, they put 5 on Lask in the first leg, and so I think that you're probably going to see something of a rotated side in the second leg on Wednesday. But you look at that one, and I think that Manchester United makes their way through, and then we figure out what it's going to look like in the quarters. And for me, I think that they can make a deep run, because if you look at the rest of the groups, right, and I'm just gonna I'll burn through them, and this could almost be a rapid fire when it comes to what we're looking at. Başakşehir out of the Turkish league, I don't think that's going to be an issue. Copenhagen, if they make their way through, won't be an issue. Lask, they'd have to make up a 5-goal deficit. Olympiacos, I think that they can be had. Wolves might be a test. If Wolves make it through in the second leg, if it gets to something like a Wolves Manchester United, I think that would be fun, because then you'd have Nuno Espirito Santo going up against Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Rangers, I don't think it'll necessarily be it'll be a tough test, but I think they can get through it. Bayer Leverkusen, we saw what they were able to do in the Bundesliga. I think that shouldn't be an issue there. Shakhtar Donetsk, tremendous team out of the Ukrainian Premier League, but I think that might be an interesting test if that's any part of their draw going forward. Wolfsburg, not concerned. Then you end up with what was it? The quarterfinals, Sevilla, Roma is also active in there as well. So you look at Basel, not necessarily a concern. Sevilla for me, Sevilla and AS Roma, that might be an interesting challenge, because we know how the teams in La Liga are when it comes to Europa League. To me, if you're looking for teams in general who have a great level of success in Europa League, I always seem to find the teams in La Liga that springboard themselves into the European theater. So Sevilla would be an interesting test for me. Inter Milan might be an interesting test if that ends up as a part of the draw. I think Inter gets past Getafe. So I think that really for Manchester United, there are a couple of teams that could be there to challenge, but I would have them in the top 4 of who's left.
So the Spanish teams both got Getafe and Sevilla. Mm-hmm. They've had their struggles throughout. Getafe looks to be the better Spanish team in this tournament right now. If you see Getafe, let's say meeting a Man U, where do you see that match going?
I think it'll be a tough one, but I think Manchester United finds a way. But I would be, like I said, you mentioned the La Liga sides, and you go up against my Premier League expertise here. For me, those would be the stumbling blocks. Those would be 2 of the teams that I think that could do some damage against a team like Manchester United. I think that the winner of Inter and Getafe could be one, and I think that Sevilla could be one as well. So I think that you're looking at a handful of teams, really, because if you compare their domestic competitions and their levels of domestic success in all of this, translating that into Europa League can be traditionally a little tough. But I think it would be a tough test, but my money would still be on Manchester United.
All right, hold on here. I had to come on here with John Freeman Nelson and Eduardo Harari. Okay,
Of course you do.
you guys are talking Spanish and all that, but I have to protect the broadcasting legend. Not you, John Freeman Nelson. You know who I'm talking about. Today, there's a match, the FA Cup.
Oh
All
yeah.
right, Chelsea. Uh, he wants me. We're talking about Norm Rumack, his favorite team, Chelsea. He wants me to ask you what's your prediction for the FA Cup
Oh,
today in about an hour's time.
well, I think that the team is not named Arsenal has a pretty good chance considering all their firepower is back, and Christian Pulisic is listed at 100%. Willian is listed as able to play. I want to see what the starting 11 looks like. I know that Frank Lampard wants to win this, and I know that they're heading into Europe as well. But I think that when you can add another trophy, I think that will that obviously helps a young manager out. It helps the team out as well. But I think that there are too many issues for Arsenal at the back. I think that they will probably run into a lot of problems. Wouldn't surprise me if it was something along the lines of 3-1. I think Aubameyang gets the one for Arsenal, but I think that there's obviously more for the blue team that is going to be playing the red team in about an hour.
Okay, so I got to break some news for Eduardo and for you. Okay,
Okay.
I just about before I came on here, 10 minutes before, I was tipped about Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor facing
Care.
Manny Pacquiao
Don't care.
in January. Manny Pacquiao, Conor McGregor,
Don't care.
Eduardo. That's like, what do you think?
Well, I think McGregor is chewing more than he can bite. Pacquiao
Biting
is,
more than he could chew.
well, yeah, whichever way you want to put it. He's going to get chewed out. That's what he's going to get. Pacquiao is the better fighter there, and he has been fighting. McGregor has been playing games until now. So it's not going to be a successful return, I don't think, to any type of fight for McGregor.
All right, John.
Don't care.
Okay. And Conor McGregor.
Here's what I think. I think that boxing has become such a parody of itself from when we all were growing up and watching it, that when the larger discussions are about made for pay-per-view events like McGregor Pacquiao, where Manny Pacquiao just wants to dance around for 10 rounds, collect a paycheck and go, and Conor McGregor thinks it's all about the show and not about the substance. They've become cartoon characters. They've become caricatures of what boxing was when we were younger. And because all these are made for pay-per-view events, much like what we're going to be seeing when Mike Tyson takes on Roy Jones Jr. in a couple of months, the only people that make out well in this are the participants and those who organized it. For any fan that wants to drop $49.99 and watch Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr., I don't even want to know what the pay-per-view cost is going to be for Pacquiao and McGregor.
$79.99.
Not interested. $79.99 for me is 3/4 of a phone bill. It is 4 tanks of gas. There are other things that I can do that are far better for me and for my family and for my friends than dropping $80 to watch that silliness. There is no way that I would be remotely interested. If there was a way where I could watch it for free, I would probably drift into the fight. I wouldn't watch any of the undercard. I might have it on in the background, but there is less than zero interest in that or any other pay-per-view right now because of where boxing is in the landscape when it comes to sports.
So
It's not. It's just not worth watching for me. I have zero interest in that.
So I'm going to bring up another thing that you have no interest in, but but it's a subject that is very very upfront right now, and it was last night that MLB might be out. And I know that I know that you don't care, John, but how does that fare for the other leagues that are going to try to start up uh, on similar terrains?
Well, all right. So let's take this a piece at a time. First and foremost, I think it comes down once again to personal responsibility, and I'm taking this strictly in the MLB since we can build from that as we go. For Major League Baseball, especially for the Miami Marlins, word has come out from a couple of different sources that it was because they didn't pay any attention to protocols. They didn't exercise any personal responsibility when they were in Atlanta, and they were there for the exhibition games. And so now you have 18 members of the roster plus 2 staff who I imagine the 2 staff are being bussed as well, but 18 members of the Miami Marlins being bussed from Philadelphia back to Miami. And I think that the larger discussion here is about responsibility and keeping an eye on the protocols and keeping an eye on the larger picture. Because if you don't pay attention to the protocols that were put out by your employers, then you're not only endangering yourself, you're endangering your teammates, you're endangering your family, you're endangering a lot of other folks, not just you. You're endangering a business, a rather large business. You're endangering a lot of other ancillary things that you're not paying attention to by going out and allegedly doing things outside of your hotel and doing all of that stuff. So first and foremost, that is the point that I would make about the Miami Marlins. My second point about the Marlins, I think that Don Mattingly, at the very least, should be suspended, if not fired, for his behavior in all of this. When you have players who test positive for COVID-19, then those players have a vote via text chain as to whether or not the remaining players should continue to play Major League Baseball games. Last time I checked, text chain was not a way to determine whether or not you should continue to play if teammates have tested positive for COVID-19. I don't think text chain was a part of the Major League Baseball protocols. So I'm getting warmed up here, Joe. So hang out with me for a second. So I think that because of that, and when Don Mattingly says, I love my guys, I love my players, they're all warriors for going through this, to me that seems like an individual who is out of touch with the severity of the situation around you. And for me to see this happening with one Major League Baseball team that could bring down the entire Jenga tower from what they've done, I think that this is squarely on the shoulders of the Miami Marlins here. And I know that we've seen some positives in St. Louis and in Philadelphia, and I'm still waiting to get the information on the background and all that. But because of what the Miami Marlins have done, you could basically have taken baseball and put it on the shelf. I think that with baseball in and of itself, I think that if you had gone to a bubble format, not home market, but bubble, like we've seen with the NWSL, like we've seen with Major League Soccer, who, by the way, were the first to, don't get revved up and saying, oh, the NBA's great, they're doing fantastic. They weren't the first. They learned from other places. If you got into a bubble format, you're seeing what's going on with the National Hockey League right now. You're seeing what's going on with the NBA. You're seeing what's going on with the WNBA. If you had had bubble hubs in New York, Chicago, and California, either in Los Angeles or in San Francisco, Oakland, where you have 2 ballparks, you have the opportunity to have 6 games in a day in multiple sites. So you could have 12, 18 games going on in a daytime, in a day part. Have those fields going. You create a system where Major League Baseball's in a bubble. You get your 60-game schedule done. You have a season. Broadcasters are happy. Fans aren't as happy, but you get your baseball. You get your live TV. There are so many things that Major League Baseball should have done and should be doing that they're not. It's disappointing across the board. End of rant.
One of the things that I thought that will be the perfect. You have, if you had the 30 teams, because you know that Arizona dropped out, early in the stage when they were thinking about this. But if you will have put in the state of California as a bubble every single major league ball club, you would have had 6 teams per city where you have played the games and alleviate all these problems that are going on with the travel and everything as a whole.
So John,
completely messed up by Major League Baseball and specifically by the Marlins so far.
So here's the whole thing. I agree with everything you said, and it works. Like you said, MLS, it worked the bubble. It's working in NBA. They just came back with the players for NHL. They have the bubble, Toronto, Edmonton. Nobody has tested positive. Okay, so Major League Baseball already probably will shut down, or who knows. But the big question is, if it's working in a bubble, what is the NFL going to do? Because they're not planning to do a bubble.
Okay. Here's my thoughts on the NFL, and I think that the NFL, and there are a couple of different ways to look at this. The National Football League probably can be one of the few entities that can do daily testing or do every other day. So the tests to make sure that your athletes are testing regularly, I don't think that's a problem. Put that to the side. I think that what we see and what we know, I mean, think back to our preseason training camps and to our OTAs. You have teams who, much like the Atlanta Falcons, have facilities either on site or attached to them for training camps. I think that, when you go and watch the Atlanta Falcons for preseason training camp, they have apartments on campus. That's where the players go. They're sequestered, and they're there for the entire time so they can focus on OTAs, so they can focus on preseason training camp, those kinds of things. I think that each of the teams in the National Football League have at least access to that same kind of a similar idea. So I think that and once again, the larger overarching element in all of this is individuals taking personal responsibility, understanding that there is a larger collective at play. So every individual has to be that guy and be in your room, DoorDash or Uber Eats or whatever. If you're hungry, they bring it to you. I know that it's worse than summer camp being locked in a room or locked in a hotel or being in a bubble. But if that's what gets this done, so sports can function, the economic engine can function, although it will be a little less, you're still getting something in economically for all of these businesses that are sports franchises and all of the ancillary stuff that's attached to it on a game day that might get a little something as opposed to a lot of nothing. I think that the NFL can be that league that can test folks regularly and get those numbers out there. But once again, biggest thing for me, personal responsibility, thinking of your teammate, thinking of the guy next to you, thinking of your family, thinking of the team in and of itself. And I mean that in a business sense. There are a lot of things at play here, but you've got to be smart about how you do it.
Okay, two things, John. First of all, I don't see your scarves or whatever, so you're not at home.
Okay, so first and foremost, I am not in Office HD today. We the boss and I went to go catch up with her mother. So we are in southeastern Alabama, and I know that my Raider Room score is going to be very, very low. I did the Soccer Down Here Power Hour before I came on with Eduardo this morning. So I've tried to come up with a room that at least doesn't have me sitting on a floor, and I apologize.
Hold on, there's no background. There's no San Francisco 49er background. There's no nothing. Come on. I expected better from you, John. Come on.
But there is there is an Auburn portrait over my left shoulder. So.
Yes, Auburn. Yeah. Did you say hi to Nick Saban too, or what?
Oh, them's fighting words in this household.
All right. So I see you're doing the do. All right, but here, I don't know.
Yesterday to get down here, yeah.
I don't know if you know this. Me and Eduardo are in Toronto. There's a huge a huge trophy going to be awarded in about 2-3 months called the Lord Stanley's Cup. Something I haven't seen in my city since I was alive. Eduardo was like 2 weeks old. when my team, I'm going to say my team, won Lord Stanley's mug. All right. Eric Cohen has said every year that team, the Toronto Maple Leafs, will be the Stanley Cup champions. Now, John Freeman Nelson, you're the most unbiased guy. You're in Atlanta, Auburn, New Mexico, whatever you want to say.
Right.
Tell Eric Cohen, because I know he's listening. He watches Spanglish Sports World all the time. Do the Maple Leafs,
No,
are they the 2020
no,
Stanley Cup champions?
no.
All right. So Eric Cohen, another year of misery, more losing your hair, everything like that. Okay. So who, in your opinion, is the Stanley Cup champion for 2020?
I'll give you my Stanley Cup final. How about that?
Okay.
Washington and Las Vegas.
Eduardo, Washington, Las Vegas, John Freeman Nelson says, what do you say?
No, to be honest, I see Edmonton getting there, and I definitely see Boston getting there.
So Eduardo says Boston, who's no wonder Eduardo's hated all over Toronto. Boston and Edmonton. Okay. Eduardo says Boston and Edmonton. This is 2020. Okay. This is 2020. And this whole year has been upside down, funny and serious, but funny and all that.
We're the 2-12 seeds coming into the Stanley Cup qualifiers.
I'm saying something unexpected is going to happen. At least one team, and it may be God's team, the Toronto Maple Leafs, in the Stanley Cup final. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but one team unexpectedly is going to make the Stanley Cup final. I don't know who it is.
Come on, Joe. The Dallas Stars have a better chance than the Toronto Maple Leafs to make it.
It doesn't matter. I'm just saying unexpectedly. Nobody's predicting Dallas Stars. Could be Mountain Dews. It doesn't matter. Okay, so it doesn't matter. Now, here, getting back to the bubble for 1 second, John.
Yeah.
Now the bubble works.
Yeah.
We have proved that now. For next season, which they're talking about for hockey and basketball, all that, starting in December. Yeah. Can they do a bubble for 6-8 months? I guess they can, but will the players accept that?
That's the question. I don't think that the players' associations will accept that kind of a thing. But once again, we don't know what the landscape of the health of this particular continent is going to be. We don't know if we're going to get that second wave that is anticipated in the winter. We don't know what it's going to look like. But there are times when you have to make sacrifices. And if that's one of the sacrifices to make sure that, once again, the economic engine gets to continue in North America, then that might have to come to pass. I don't know if something like maybe what you do, and this is wild conjecture at this point, considering we don't know if you're going to have fans in buildings, which is, I know, what owners want, regardless of the sport we're talking about. But do you do it in stages? Do you do it where it's a couple of months, you get in a bunch of games, you take some time off, you do a couple of months, you get through stage 2, you take some time off, you get through stage 3, you take some time off, you get into your playoffs. So, I mean, that's or do you do it like you're doing it this year? And I think that's the larger questions going forward, but we still have 90 days to figure out what those formats are going to look like. So I would say anything is on the table right now, and I think that players associations and leagues have to understand that things are going to have to be thought of a little differently, and I think that you're going to have to use your imagination, and at the same time, you're going to have some sacrifices, because you have a lot of multimillionaires who own businesses, and I'm not just talking in sports, I'm talking in general. You're talking newspapers, car dealerships, gas stations, all that kind of stuff. Anyone who owns a business is having to figure out how to reorient themselves in this new normal. And the new normal now could look different in 90 days than it does now. And that's the larger thing in all of this, is like, how do we continue to adjust? How can we be nimble as a society? Sports team, everyone gets what they're looking for.
Okay, so I just want to ask one more question. We talked about NHL, NFL, or whatever, but John, you're in the home of college football. Let's put it that way, okay? Any news that you can report what they're doing in Division 8 college football? Because I know, like, look, it's August. College football in a normal world would have started in about 10, 15 days, okay? Who knows
3
if it's
weeks.
starting or whatever. Yeah. So what do you hear?
It's dependent upon the conference. Right now, it looks like the ACC and the SEC, they're going to be playing conference only games. Word came out yesterday on CBS Sports that the Big Ten might not have any kind of college football season. They're still waiting on that. Big 12 is going to have as regular a schedule as humanly possible, it sounds like. You have teams from the FCS 1AA trying to sit there and schedule games with folks from the Big 12. And it looks like Kansas is looking to do that. Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, they're looking to do that and start their schedules a little earlier. August 29th, I think, is the date that was in question, 4 weeks from today. So it's literally going to, what we know now is probably going to change the next couple of weeks. Louisiana came out as an article in the Baton Rouge Advocate where, depending on where the state of Louisiana is in their recovery, either stage 2 or stage 3, you could have 50 to 70% capacity at Tiger Stadium in Baton Rouge, which could mean that you could have as many as 77,000 people at a college football game for LSU if you get to that point. So what you're hearing right now, Pac-12 is going to go conference only, those kinds of things. So what you're hearing right now, obviously, as we talked about it on this Saturday, could be different next Saturday. It could be different in 2 weeks or so. So conferences are still looking at when they want to start things. Notre Dame, I think, was probably the biggest news of the week, where Notre Dame is going to be a part of the ACC schedule on the whole this year. And you're seeing conference games and a +1 from the ACC, where they're trying to preserve rivalries and things like that. So keep an eye on scheduling, keep an eye on the big Power 5 conferences and how they continue to adjust going forward. Things could be different, but it looks like there's at least a path right now with conference only games and going with a +1 to keep a rivalry. But the other thing to keep an eye on, we've been mentioning economics in this show a whole lot, how this impacts those FCS schools, the group of 5 schools in FBS, and the FCS schools, the Division 1AA schools that get those paycheck games. Because what those paycheck games, you know, the blowouts that we always see, that Eric will sit there and he'll look at the line and go, yeah, take the over because Alabama's going to beat New Mexico State by 48 and take the points and all that kind of stuff. Those games. Keep an eye on the group of 5 schools and the FCS schools, and how not getting these games, and I think it was 36 games involving 28 schools, how it impacts the bottom lines of those schools going forward. You might see schools eliminate more sports because they don't have the money and the revenues to keep those sports alive. Keep an eye on your Title IX sports, your non-revenue sports, and a lot of the group of 5s and below, because you won't have these games that you normally have that are tied to your programs. You could have a trickle-down effect severely of the economics of sports when it comes to college athletics, and a lot of programs won't have next year what they have now. Stanford's blowing out a third of their entire athletic department when it comes to non-revenue sports because they won't have the money for it next year. Keep an eye on that as the economics of sports continues.
Eduardo, do you know this is why he's one of the Hall of Famers of BarnBurner? He has a yellow jacket. Do you have a yellow jacket, Eduardo?
I have one, but not the correct one.
Yeah, he's yellow belly. All right, Eduardo, it's time to close it out. You've been graced with the Hall of Famer and the icon, the legend, the head poobah of BarnBurner. Let's see how you close it out. Go ahead.
So, first of all, I would like to thank John Freeman Olson for always being here on the show. Second, your presence, my Puba, is
you know
it's
what?
always great.
The pleasure's all yours. You know that. Okay, go ahead. We got a boxing show coming up. Come on, knockout. I'm looking for a knockout.
So I just want to remind everybody that they can hear every single show, and this show particularly, on the BarnBurner Radio Network and its 122 platforms on social media. Also, remember, you have to check out barnburner.ca for all the news, whether it's written, radio, or TV, BarnBurner, watch it, hear it, read it, download it, but especially live it. And for Spanglish Sports World English edition, this has been your Eduardo Harari. And until next week, when we unite again, remember, right after my show, in about 5 minutes time, you have Knockout. Watch it and live it with Noel Krop.